Canada stands at a critical turning point. Over the past decade, Justin Trudeau's leadership has been a mix of progressive triumphs and unfulfilled promises, often overshadowed by a growing sense of disillusionment among Canadians. His government has championed several high-profile initiatives, such as legalizing cannabis, pushing for gender parity in the cabinet, and taking steps toward climate change action. On the global stage, he has worked to restore Canada's relationships with international powers, presenting a message of unity and inclusivity. Yet, for all of Trudeau's attempts to create a progressive legacy, the reality for many Canadians is one of mounting frustrations and unmet expectations. From rising costs of living to an ever-increasing housing crisis, Trudeau's promises of a better future seem more distant with each passing day. With public discontent growing, the question now arises, is it time for a change in leadership, and if so, who will step in to lead Canada through its current crisis? Canada's economic landscape has shifted dramatically in recent years, with inflation rates reaching levels not seen in decades. The soaring cost of essential goods, food, gas, housing, has left many Canadians struggling to make ends meet. The housing crisis, in particular, has escalated to crisis levels, with homeownership moving further out of reach for younger generations. Cities like Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal have become some of the most expensive places to live in North America, and for many, the dream of owning a home has become a distant fantasy. Even renting is out of reach for many people, as skyrocketing rental prices leave individuals and families grappling with the reality of paying half or more of their income just to secure a roof over their heads. In response, Trudeau's government has attempted to address these issues with measures that many feel fall short of the magnitude of the problems. The Trudeau government's approach to the rising cost of living has been widely criticized as inadequate and disconnected from the realities faced by everyday Canadians. One of the most discussed measures was a one-time $250 GST rebate for Canadians earning less than $150,000 per year. This rebate, while presented as a relief for struggling families, has been largely dismissed as a band-aid solution to a much larger problem. For many families, $250 will barely cover the cost of a week's worth of groceries or the rising energy bills that have become a regular strain on household budgets. It's a small amount in the face of rising inflation, and the public has voiced frustration that such a modest gesture is seen as sufficient to address the widespread economic hardship. Similarly, the temporary removal of the GST on essential items like food, children's clothing, and diapers was heralded as a victory for struggling families. While the move was applauded by some, it failed to provide a long-term solution to the underlying economic issues at play. The cost of living has not been reduced in any significant way, and inflation continues to rise. The short-lived relief provided by the GST break will do little to address the broader issue of affordability that looms over Canadians. Once the break ends, families will find themselves right back where they started, struggling to afford basic necessities. For many, this has come to symbolize Trudeau's inability to offer meaningful, long-term solutions to the problems that matter most. The lack of decisive action from Trudeau's government has not only fueled economic discontent but also left many questioning the government's priorities. While issues like climate change, international relations, and social justice have been important to the Trudeau administration, they have often come at the expense of addressing the bread-and-butter issues that affect the average Canadian. Programs aimed at reducing emissions or improving the country's international standing have little impact on the daily lives of Canadians, who are more concerned with making sure they can afford their rent and groceries. Meanwhile, Trudeau's policy decisions, such as the carbon tax, have had unintended consequences, particularly for working-class Canadians who are already struggling with rising prices. The carbon tax, for instance, has raised the cost of fuel, which in turn drives up transportation and food costs. While it's clear that these policies are aimed at achieving broader environmental goals, they have disproportionately impacted the people who are least able to absorb the additional costs. Trudeau's inability to adequately respond to these pressing issues has also led to a growing sense of frustration with the political establishment as a whole. Many Canadians feel that their government has become increasingly out of touch with their needs. There is a growing perception that Trudeau, once seen as a politician who truly connected with the people, has become isolated from the struggles that Canadians face every day. His government's focus on global issues and symbolic gestures, such as hosting world leaders or supporting international climate accords, has alienated a large portion of the population who feel that their own concerns are being ignored. The feeling that Trudeau's leadership is more concerned with appearing virtuous on the world stage than with addressing the real challenges at home has led to a decline in his popularity. What was once a hopeful vision of a progressive Canada has begun to feel like a distant dream for many. As public discontent grows, the Conservative Party, under the leadership of Pierre Poilievre, has seized on this disillusionment. Poilievre has positioned himself as a champion for affordability, fiscal responsibility, and a government that puts Canadians first. His promises to cut taxes, ease the burden of the carbon tax, and address the housing crisis have resonated with many voters who are fed up with Trudeau's inability to effectively manage the country's economic challenges. Poilievre has also stressed the importance of restoring faith in Canadian institutions, which many see as having become increasingly distant and disconnected from the needs of the public. His focus on practical solutions, rather than ideological purity, has earned him a growing base of support among Canadians who are tired of political theatre and want real action. However, Poilievre's rise has not been without challenges. Despite his popularity among many Canadians, he has faced criticism from some quarters for his combative style and his stance on certain social issues. His critics argue that his policies are overly simplistic and fail to address the complexity of Canada's challenges. Furthermore, Poilievre's focus on tax cuts and fiscal austerity has raised concerns about whether his approach would be sustainable in the long term. While his proposals are appealing to those frustrated by the high cost of living, there are questions about how they would be implemented and whether they would actually bring about the change that Canadians are hoping for. At the same time, other political figures, such as Jagmeet Singh of the NDP, have found themselves in a precarious position. Singh, who was once seen as a strong alternative to Trudeau, has been criticized for his continued support of the Liberal government. His alignment with Trudeau, despite the growing dissatisfaction with his leadership, has led to a sense of betrayal among some of his supporters. Singh's decision to prop up the Liberal government in exchange for certain policy concessions has left many wondering whether he is truly committed to the progressive agenda he once championed. His failure to break from Trudeau's government has caused a rift within the NDP, with some members questioning whether Singh's leadership has been compromised by political pragmatism. The next federal election will be a decisive moment for Canada. The country faces significant economic challenges, and Canadians are searching for a leader who can offer real solutions. Trudeau's government has failed to deliver on its promises, and the public is growing weary of political leaders who seem out of touch with their needs. As Poilievre and the Conservative Party continue to gain momentum, it remains to be seen whether they can translate their popularity into meaningful change. The path forward will require strong leadership, bold action, and a government that is willing to prioritize the needs of its citizens over political posturing and symbolic gestures. In this moment of crisis, Canada needs a leader who understands the struggles of ordinary Canadians and is willing to take decisive action to rebuild the country's economy. The rising cost of living, the housing crisis, and the growing gap between the rich and the poor demand urgent attention. The question is whether the current political establishment, under Trudeau's leadership or with a new government led by Poilievre, can deliver the change that Canadians so desperately need. As the political landscape continues to evolve, the future of Canada hinges on the ability of its leaders to rise to the challenge and provide a path forward that offers hope and opportunity for all Canadians. The time for change is now, and the choices made in the coming months will define the future of the nation for years to come.